Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Dennis, and I'm going to talk about wildlife monitoring and scaring away geese using drones and IoT. For everybody who wants to be here for something like this, a super cool way with drones to just shoot everything and make sure the problem is away, I have to tell you, it's going to be more about this, all kind of stuff that can go wrong when you try to start a business and everything around that. I'm a consultant for Open Value as a software engineer. In 2020, I started my own company, Drost, and I'm mostly going to talk about the journey I took with my company, the challenges I faced, the stuff I did, and the lessons learned, so that if any of you wants to do something similar, you hopefully make different and better mistakes than I did. After the journey, I will also talk a bit about the technical part, but it's going to be mostly a fun talk about the journey with less technical things, which might be nice at the end of the day. So, Drost, for those, or most of you who probably never heard of it, we scare away geese, and we currently have quite some customers. We're here working with some provinces, but it all started as a hobby. I always liked flying drones, and the drones I flew with were relatively big. And even at the time, it was legal to fly them in a park. However, it's a bit frowned upon, and I can see why, because if something like this falls out of the sky onto you, if you're just being nice in the park, it's not very nice. My ex-girlfriend, she's a farmer, so when I got a relationship with her, I all of a sudden got all of this private property where I could fly without bothering anybody. And one of the first times I was flying, this is not the first time, but you could immediately see the effect I also saw. I took off, and there were hundreds, maybe even 1,000 geese that all of a sudden took to the sky, and at that moment, the little boy inside of you comes along and you're like, this is kind of fun. Let's see what happens if I just zigzag a little bit, chase them a little bit, just see what happens, what kind of behavior they have. And yeah, I started playing with that a little bit. And then, yeah, geese are quite fast, so when they were all gone, I just made the end of my drone route because I was flying for fun. I landed and walked back to the farm, and then she came to me like, you should definitely keep on doing this, because geese cause insane amount of damage. And at that time, I already knew farmers a little bit, and I knew that insane amount of damage for a farmer can be anything between a few €100 and millions of euros, and this whole range is possible. So I started doing a little bit of research, and I'm sorry the graph is in Dutch. Bij 12 is an official governmental institution. They only make Dutch graphs, apparently. But I'll tell the important parts. Fauna in the Netherlands causes a lot of damage. It has been growing for the last 10, 15 years. That's the orange graph. And in 2022, it was even over 34 million euros just in 1 year. As you can see in the gray graph, most of the damage is caused by different types of geese. Even more than 3/4 of this. And most of it is to grassland. Now, why is grass so expensive and important? Well, farmers use it to feed their animals, mostly the cows, but also other livestock. And every farmer says their own grass is better than they can buy somewhere else. It's also because they're very proud of it, but also part of it is true, because no farmer will ever sell their best grass. They will always sell what they have left. So every farmer wants their own best grass to feed their cows. Only sadly, the geese can see from the sky, and they are sadly very smart animals, can see where your best grass is, and every farmer always knows when you want to put your cows out to a field the next day, that's the day when the geese will come and eat all the best grass, so your cows only have the geese shit left. It's not only a money problem, it's also an environmental problem, because the geese take the very nutritious and nitrogen-rich soil and grass, eat it, and actually bring it to the Nature 2000 and the other reserves where we don't want them. For those of you following the Dutch news a little bit, there's a lot of discussions around the farmers and what they're doing. But the geese, nature itself, is actually a big factor in migrating this nitrogen from the farmers to the nature reserves. So for all of these reasons, we want to have less damage done by the geese. Well, current methods, I think everybody is familiar with hunting. I don't think I have to explain that one. Guessing is one a lot of people don't know about, and there's a good reason for it, because they don't do it very publicly. It's as bad as it sounds. There's a month and a half, a year, where most geese are unable to fly. It's called de rui in Nederlands. And because they can't fly, it's very easy to catch big groups of geese, some even thousands at a time. You can put them in a fan, and, well, I think the rest is quite explanatory in the name. Yeah, it's a bit frowned upon, but it is quite effective. Other automated methods are, for example, stationary lasers, who just, laser around a little bit once every 10, 15 minutes. Gas cannons, automated, with the same ID, just put it on every 15 minutes. The downside of most of these methods is, again, geese are very smart. I've even heard stories of hunters where the geese are smart enough to recognize the car of the hunter, and when the car of the hunter just comes onto the property of the farmer, they know what about the reach of the gun is. They just fly 100 meters further than the reach of the gun, and they wait there till the hunter leaves. And it's not just one time I heard this story. I've actually seen it myself, but then without the gun part. When I've been doing this for quite a while, and there's a few polders. When I drive into a polder with my car, the geese start to leave because they know there's this irritating guy with his drone again. And they're actually that smart. But that's also why hunting is very hard and not scalable, and they get used to lasers and gas cannons. So that's why we developed another method with the drones. After some testing, we found that it was not just a lucky shot once, but it kept on being effective. And it works very well because, at least in my opinion, it's extremely scalable. And as you can see here, you can scare the geese away from quite a distance, sometimes even 200-300 meters away from the drone. And with the speed and battery life of a drone, one flight can cover about 500 hectares. That means that in 15-20 minutes, you can clear 500 hectares of space for geese. Compared to a hunter, driving from one side in a polder to the other would take 20 to 30 minutes, and that's just the driving part, not even doing something. So the scalability of the drones is insane. And that's why we believe that this was going to be a good method. And we started doing this on one farm, the farm of my ex-girlfriend, but soon other farmers caught on, like, oh, they don't have geese. We scare them away to other people, so we also want to try this. And actually the first few farmers, this was super effective. It was easy to do with me and the partner I started the company with. We would just take turns flying, sometimes even up to 8 times a day, because especially at the start, they're very stubborn and don't want to leave the nice eating spots. But it kept on being effective. And I think that's the biggest difference with most current methods, that instead of them getting used to it after half a year or something, after 4 or 5 years, it's still very effective. There's even been independent research from Provincie Utrecht onto our method, and it actually shows that they do get used to it, but in the other way around. They start evading the spaces where we work, so that we have to fly less times a day or even less times a week to get the same results. So instead of not working anymore, it starts working better over time, and this scalability is what makes it very good for us. This also brought upon some new challenges, because we only were, you're going to see it in a second, we only were with this within humans, so we need to find solutions to do this easily at more than one place. So we thought we could automate the drones. We could program routes, give them to a farmer, they just press start and the drone does its thing, or we can do total automation of the drones, which is very cool and something I really wanted to do. However, the Dutch rulings are very difficult around this, and technically it's also difficult to do. And we also found that if you're doing this not at 3 or 4 farmers, but at 5 or 6 polders, even with full automation, most farmers themselves are also working with the cows on the inside or just one part of the land. Ramon, kun je even kijken wie er goed in zit? So you want to know where they are and when they are there, so that even if you work with multiple pilots, at least you know when they need to do any action. So that's when we needed or started developing sensors. And I'm very curious, what kind of methods would you think of if you, just out of the blue, that's also how we started this, with no experience in detecting animals, how would you detect animals? Any suggestion how you could do this? Yes?
Temperature.
Sorry?
Temperatures.
Temperature?
I mean, of the bodies of the geese.
Infrared heat sense, that's an option, yes. Any sound, very good option. Any other interesting ideas?
Motion.
Motion? Yeah, that's also a possibility. I think most of these ideas fall in one of these two categories, because, yeah, both motion and temperature, I think, fall into video, and, yeah, the rest, I think, is audio. Our idea was also first video, motion, because object recognition, there was a lot to find on the internet on how to do this. We could take a picture, and it was relatively easy to detect the geese at 10, 20 meters. But then we thought, we're going to do this on 1,000 hectares. If we have a range of 100 meters, that means we need a few thousand sensors. One good camera costs a few €100. As a startup without external money, maybe not the best idea. At the same time, audio, although there's way more background noise, and we didn't have any experience with sound detection and audio recognition, the equipment is very cheap. For 10, 20 euros, you can buy a microphone that is more than capable of detecting animals. And the range, we found out, is 600 to even 800 meters in the right weather conditions. So you have an insane range, so that for 500 hectares, you need 5 to 10 sensors. So that's way cheaper. So that's the route we took. I will tell later on way more about how we do the audio recognition. But first, a bit about the journey about developing the sensor. And this is actually the first time we tried the audio sensor. Not really a sensor yet, it's just a Raspberry Pi with a microphone plugged into it, thrown into a field, just stand beside it, and put it on recording. And whenever we heard the geese, we would mark the time, and then later on we just listened to the recordings, like, can we actually, do we hear the geese? How far away can we hear the geese? And this was the first version, but also the first problem. We forgot it one day, and it was there in the morning, and even in summer, there's dough in the morning. So we broke the sensor, or the Raspberry Pi, because it got wet. We got a very high-tech solution for this. We opened the jerry can, glued it on the inside, and this works. And this version on the bottom has actually been at 2 or 3 of our customers in a production environment. So this is not a prototype anymore. This was a working production environment for our sensor. Spoiler alert, putting aluminum foil around the microphone in the wind, not a good idea. But these kind of things also for us were very interesting, because as a software engineer, I almost never make solutions like this, and definitely not for something you want to have in production, have something that people depend on. While on the other hand, with the low experience I had in hardware, for me this was a perfect solution because it worked. Maybe I had to go there once a day to fix it, but for that half a day it worked, and I didn't have to be there flying or driving around all the time. So that's also something I learned about software engineering, at least for me, that why it's so difficult as a software engineer to just make something that's good enough for the moment, put it in production, get feedback, and then continue with that feedback, instead of making it perfect first, or almost perfect, and then going there. But I'll get some more examples of those later, because we got some more problems. We got a lot of things that could break. As I said, the aluminum foil didn't work, so we just put some cloth around it, a 10-minute solution to a problem, and we were like, oh, we'll just find out when the microphones break because of the condensity of the water. But after a year, they still work. We had some wind problems, so we just threw in the brick there, glued it in there, and we didn't want to have the small batteries anymore because they didn't work long enough. So we took car batteries and just put a bucket over them, and then they're watertight as well. And these are the kind of developments that, again, in the software, I would never do. Because, for example, for the water thing, I would make a perfect casing, make sure it's watertight, do a lot of tests, and maybe after a few months, I would have something that would survive 3, maybe 5 years. But on the other hand, those few months, if you're developing a company or starting a company with 1 or 2 people, is time you don't have. And it's very nice that you would have a solution that would survive many years. But in 10 minutes, this solution also survived a year. So make sure, if you're in any project you're doing, that you're actually solving the problem at hand and not solving the problem you want to solve. Because that's something, at least I, try to do quite often, and later on find out that something that didn't need to be solved, or the solution I had within a few minutes was more than good enough. Actually, the cloth thing we still do, but now we have a special cloth they use in the entertainment industry that's water repellent. And that's just a more than good enough solution, because with that, the microphones don't even get wet in very strong rain. So the cloth thing works. And for most other things, easy and cheap solutions quite often work. Something we're very proud of, not too much explanation about it. It was the first time we had enough money to not buy junk and put our sensors around it, but buy dedicated watertight boxes where everything could be in the same box. Does it look very interesting? But to us, it was quite a big step. Then those batteries were still 20 kilos. We had to replace them once every week, which when you have a few customers is easy. When you get more customers, and some of the fields are 600-700 meters walking through the dirt with 20-kilo batteries, you want to stop that. So we attached solar panels again, only this time really big. They were not very handy to get there. They took specialized equipment like tractors or a quad or whatever. So only with farmers we knew we could do this. So our next improvement was actually using dedicated electric fencing boxes. These are made with like a small solar panel, a battery, and then the electric fencing equipment. Well, we replaced it with our newest sensors. These were also a little bit nicer, but still just soldered Raspberry Pis into it. But connected with a solar panel, these could stay for months at a time without needing any battery changes. Only during winter and sometimes during autumn, we had to change them once every month. But this solution still made it possible for us to work, to do our thing, to keep developing our business without waiting for the perfect sensor, for the perfect system. Just one more about the sensors. This is what we currently have. So as you can see, it's now elevated off the ground. The farmers can even mow underneath it. And the right version even has an internal battery, so that you don't have any external batteries that can damage anymore. And there's even custom-made PCBs in them, because we're actually now making reliable, scalable sensors. And there's about 50 to 80 of those in the fields in the Netherlands, especially with one of our bigger projects we're currently doing with the province of Utrecht, where we're sensing geese and some other animals on 8,000 hectares. And for those who don't know how big that is, that's a couple of times of Amsterdam, depending on how you calculate, but it's a really big size. And yeah, in my opinion, really cool how we started with literally a jerry can with the Raspberry Pi glued into it, and now we're making actual, in my opinion, professional sensors. Another thing that's very nice about doing this kind of business, I really like the flexibility I have as a developer, and I think most people here also know that it's really nice. But having the flexibility to also do these kind of things, having a sunset or a sunrise in a field where there's nobody around you, and you're just fixing something to actually help producing more and better food, it's really fulfilling. And to me, at least, it's more fulfilling than most of the work I do as a software engineer, because it's more tangible. It feels more real to be out there in a field. Don't get me wrong, I really like software development, so I'm not saying that's not nice. But the combination of doing that with this is nice, but also the problems are a bit more realistic. Sometimes we had some errors with the sensor. We got into the field to see what went wrong. Did the battery fail? Did we glue something wrong? No, a sheep broke free and actually thought our sensor was a nice meal. So it started dissecting it and eating all the parts. It was even that bad that it didn't want to move away. And when we put one of the tools down to like push it a bit harder, it started eating our tools. I don't know what they give this sheep, but yeah, it was interesting. Also another time, as you can see, I go with my normal car into the fields. In the summer you can do this. I've been towed out once so far, so don't try this at home. But I've been doing it for a couple of years, and as long as you're not very stubborn and trust the farmers, you can do it. If they say, I'm not sure, definitely don't, because then you need to be towed out, and that's not nice. But in this case, I was in the field placing a sensor, quite focused. I was in the corner of one of the fields, there was ditches around it. It was a nice day, so I was just looking around, relaxing. And I told the farmer I was going to be there, but apparently one of his helpers didn't know I was there. So he changed some gates around so that the cows could go to another field. And I was just doing my thing, heard sounds behind it, turned around, and this was literally my view. Cows were licking my car, seeing what that strange thing was doing there. And yeah, I finished my work, but the hard part came afterwards, because the cows were very curious to the car, and not very scared of it, because compared to a tractor, this thing is tiny. So when I started driving, they just followed me, kept around me, so that was one of the hardest times getting out of the fields, except for one when I had to be pulled out. And this is just what sheep do to microphones. I found it funny to... we found these before we found the sheep the first time. We had no clue what happened. And then later on we found the sheep and knew what happened. But these are all kinds of things. If you start making the perfect sensor, you wouldn't think of these kind of things happening because there was an electric fence around it, so no sheep should be here. But the electric fence can, fail as well. So now we have protected wires so that they don't get eaten anymore. And these are the kind of solutions that at least I would never come up with if I were developing this in a vacuum before using it in the field. So my suggestion is always, as fast as possible, get it out there, get people or animals interacting with it, and see what happens, because that just makes your software, your hardware, or whatever you're making, way more robust to the actual use case. Because I could have been testing these sensors for a year or two until I've got something perfect in my backyard. But all kind of things like strong winds, animals, cows, stuff like that would never happen there. So there would have been a lot less learnings, and I think the sensor I would have had them by now would not be working on the scale we're doing. Some other challenges we had, just to be swift. I thought we were using a lot of drones, and I've been mostly talking about the sensors. That's because we also switched a little bit. We are using the drones now as a tool, and don't have the ambition anymore to automate them, because we think there are a lot of people automating them, there's a lot of rules around it, and we are way better at the sensors. But also, working with the drones comes with challenges. No matter how good you fly, especially the older ones, can just lose connection, and then you have to go into a field and find where it landed, or crashed. But there's also other cases when, starting a company, when you're working with more people, especially employees, they never care for your stuff as good as you do, so that also brings some challenges. I also got a whole new meaning to local development. Our sensors, nowadays, we can remotely connect to them. The early versions, we could not. So local development meant bringing your laptop and trying to fix in a field and hoping it wouldn't rain that day. So that was an interesting experience. The sensor worked at the end, so that was kind of happy. So those, are basically our sensors. Theoretically, we can detect anything that makes a sound. And for people curious to what kind of things we are looking into, a lot of species have come along, but we are now mostly also focusing at bats. Bats cause a problem if you want to isolate your home or renovate. You have to do some checks to see if there's no protected species. And we are now trying to develop a sensor that can actually help ecologists do these tests so that we can help isolate more homes and reach the climate goals. That's a whole other story. If you want to know more about that, just notify me later on. I can tell a lot about that. So to recap about the sensor part. If you want to do something with hardware, don't be scared. I knew nothing. I've had to use a Raspberry Pi once before I started this. And now I'm actually making, in my eyes, semi-professional sensors. So just start with something, connect something that interests you to it, a microphone, a light bulb, whatever interests you, a video camera, and start playing with it. Worry about one aspect at a time. If you want to make too big steps, you're going to get discouraged and you're going to get nowhere, while fixing one thing, putting it out there, and in the meantime fixing the other thing while the new thing crashes and gives you new ideas, is a way easier development cycle. And replace your prototypes. First, we just edit upon it. I do it in software as well. If somebody says, oh, this works, why replace everything? You can also just add upon it. But after a while, it starts failing, and you don't know why, because all the parts are old, or you have a newer part anywhere, or it's just a weird combination. So when you've got something new, once in a while, just do a full swap of the old things. You can recycle some parts, but don't be afraid to replace everything. Well, how do we actually recognize the animals? As I said, we use audio, and I think most of you know these waveforms, but it's very hard to, at least for me, if I see this, I've got no clue what happened here. This could be a human, this could be a cow, this could be wind, no idea. And when we started doing this, we actually found something interesting. Almost nobody is actually doing audio recognition with machine learning. Maybe nowadays with like the voice recognition and stuff, they do it because it's more real time. But most people actually do image recognition on spectrograms. For those who never heard of a spectrogram, this is a conversion of a wave file with Fourier transformation to this image, which is called spectrogram. On this axis, you can see the frequency, and the other axis is just the time. And over here, you can actually start recognizing some sounds, especially if you're trained in it a little bit. For example, these nice waves over here, you can see multiple of them on different frequencies. That's actually the song of a bird. And you could see a little bit how you recognize them as well. They go up and down in a very high pace. They're very nice to hear, also nice to see. While on the other hand, on the bottom right, there's a geese, which is a very obnoxious, irritating, not nice sound. So the visualization of that is just a blob. So you can actually see stuff that sounds nice, also looks nice, and the other way around. Well, our sensors upload audio 1 minute at a time. Doing the analysis on a full minute is relatively hard. It's also CPU intensive to do the Fourier transformation. So we do the analysis in the cloud. There's also some information about that later. But to make it a bit easier and also make our predictions more precise, we cut it into 5-second pieces. So every piece over here would be a separate image we feed to our machine learning model. And then we score it. And we can actually see that, as I said, the bottom right, pretty sure it's geese. There's also some other spots in the middle, the ugly blobs, that's geese. There's also one interesting one at the top of the right, that's also got a high score. We found out that everything above 0.7 with our model, we're pretty sure is a geese. So that one is pretty sure a geese. But visually, especially if I go back, and you can see it without all the figures, I don't see anything. But then if you start listening to it, very far in the background, there actually is a geese. And that's something I'm quite proud of. We've made a model that can actually detect geese, when as a human, it's almost impossible, only if you know it's there, put the volume to maximum, you can hear the geese, and our model can now find them. A downside of this is that it needs a lot of data to get to this point, and the amount of data is like hundreds and hundreds of hours, and to train this data, you have to label it, which means me and my colleague had to listen to hundreds and hundreds of hours of geese sounds, which is not only very annoying, but it scars you for life. Whenever there's a geese, I'm immediately awake because there's a geese. I'm triggered to activate when there's a geese. So I've not only trained the model to react to geese, sadly I've also trained myself. So how do we do it? We host almost everything we do in AWS. That's because, as a starter, it was quite easy to do. There was a lot of information, and it's also relatively cheap. We got in a program where we got some credits from AWS. So that was also nice to start. They do this very smartly. They catch you early, and then you have to stay with them. But basically, we have the Raspberry Pi-based sensor. Whenever it boots, it requests some information about what kind of jobs do I need to do and where am I. And it just starts recording. It does a sanity check if there's any audio in the file, because if that's in the middle of the night and there's no sound at all, why analyze it? Because if there's nothing to analyze. But if there's any sound, we just upload it to an S3 bucket, which triggers another Lambda function. That one does some sanity checks to the audio, and then puts the file name in a queue. From this queue, we scale EC2 machines, which do basically all the hard work. That's where our machine learning model first converts all the audio files to spectrograms, to the 5-second images, and then starts putting it through our machine learning model. This results in an array of 12 values. As I said, 1 minute divided by 5 seconds. Well, you've got 12 predictions. So this array of predictions, we then send onto a next Lambda. This Lambda stores the results in a database and also does some sanity checks if action is required, because if there's keys, our pilots need to know where they need to go and when they need to do some actions. The interesting part about this setup, and I'm not saying this is the best way to do this, we've just found out this works for us and we don't have the time to improve it yet. But the nice thing is, we also try to do some local analysis on the Raspberry Pi. And what we then can do is just not upload the sound, but immediately send the results to the result Lambda, and the whole process stays the same. The notifications, the storing in the database, everything stays the same. And because AWS handles all the scaling based on the queue size, everything there scales down, which is also very handy if you just destroy all your sensors at once, because you don't have any cost of AWS, you just have cost of you going into the fields. But it's a very nice side effect if you're having a startup with a lot of testing in production. We also have a nice dashboard based on this, just, small preview. Here you can see all the sensors. For the ones knowing these places, this is near Amersfoort. And you can just see how many hits were there. And this is also interesting information because we actually also measure at time. And that's why we also work with some research companies or universities. Because the ecologists always thought that at night, geese are dormant. And while we found that actually at night, the last few years, they're super active because during the day, a lot of work is being done in getting them away. Not only by us, but also by hunters, by lasers, by everything. So they're actually shifting their habits, which ecologists didn't know. And with our sensors now measuring at night, we've also found some new information about animal habits, which is kind of cool, at least in my opinion. Yeah, something about the scale. As you can see, there's quite some sensors here. And every sensor uploads between 600 megabytes and 1,000 megabytes a day of data that needs to be analyzed. Every day. So if you've got 50 to 80 sensors out there, that's a lot of data. And the fact that we can do it with our way of processing for under 150 euros a month as a startup, I'm still very happy with that. So far, we are not improving our architecture that much yet, because as I said, only improve what's the most important thing, and we have way bigger problems still. So, if you want to do something similar, always not only start your company with the ID and keep on doing this, but also do your company, your ID in an agile way. As I said, I started with this brilliant idea, in my mind, to make these automated drones, put them in boxes, don't have to do anything anymore. But even if we would have them, when do they need to fly? Where do they need to fly? So we found out actually currently the sensors are our main product. We still do the geese, but we use the sensors for way more than just scaring the geese. And that's really our expertise. And we have not really found other companies who do the same thing, while a lot of companies are automating drones way better than we could have ever done. And if you want to start anything, you can do it while having another job, while having another life. You can just start and figure out where you go. And as soon as you got your first customers, you can start growing it from there and learning what's really important and what makes you unique. And I would advise anybody who has dreams or wishes like that to just try it, because it's a lot of fun. You get a lot of interesting challenges. It's really frustrating, but really do it about something you're passionate about, because there's gonna come challenges. And if you're not passionate about the thing you're starting, after the first 2 challenges, or maybe 3, you'll stop. And if you really like what you're doing, you'll continue and hopefully get something nice. One of the last slides, how do we want to do it? We still want to do the automated drones. We now just want to buy the automated drones. So ideally, we have our sensors, and sorry for the Dutch letters, I will tell what's standing there. But ideally, we'd have our sensors, and when geese come into our fields, we get a notification, and there's just a drone in a box system. DJI is now even making those. And the drones come out of it. We just program a path where it needs to go, and it will start scaring away the geese. It can do this like a dog and sheep. It can have like this pattern to even steer them to a certain direction to make sure that they go towards fields where they can cause less damage. Because we know where they're going, we can estimate their direction and where they will go into. And if that would be another field where we're supposed to be protecting, we can even have one of the drones there, have like a preventive perimeter around the fields to, before they even land, scare them away. What's nice about our sensors is that there could be all kind of protected animals there, and you want, like the grutto and birds like that, we really want them in the Netherlands. Knowing where they are with our sensors, we can evade those with the drone and only use the defensive perimeter to scare the geese. This is what we like to be doing in the future, and hopefully we'll get there. It's always exciting. And for now, thank you very much for your time, and yeah. Are there any questions? Do we have a? Well, the conventional methods like hunters and stuff like that. There are some other companies that are making like bird alert or stuff like that. They make like a laser that I think they use motion to also detect birds and then activate the laser. Using drones, some farmers have actually started doing it. So they are sort of competitors. But in the sensor part, actually, we are one of the only ones, as far as I know, who are doing it. And I think what makes this work very well is doing it on a big scale with sensors, because then you can fly very effective. So that specific thing, no competitors, but on the bird scaring as a whole, definitely. Yes? Yeah, I think cost and internet-wise, that would definitely be more effective. So far, just our models are not efficient enough to do that, but with a more efficient model, that would definitely be better. Yeah. But yeah, on the other hand, as I said, we're a small company, we're a small startup. This part works. We have a lot of things we want to start working on. So it's a relatively low priority for now because the cost is manageable, but ideally, yes. Yeah. Yes?
Maybe two questions. I was curious about the geese behavior. So if you detect them by sound, what if 5 minutes later they fly away already? That's rendering the location moot, right? So is geese very mobile and move around quite fast?
Yeah, they can reach speeds of up to 70 or 80 kilometers an hour if they're high in the air, so they're quite fast. On the other hand, there's also lazy, so they only move if they have to. But if there's a threat, they definitely move, and they're smart enough to move as little as possible, as I explained with the hunters, for example, as well.
Okay. And then that's make the audio detection make sense, right? Because otherwise, if they're not too lazy, they move all the time.
Yeah.
The location just constantly being updated. So the second question is, for audio, how big is it? Because like if you work on the farm, network might be a challenge. I'm not sure, maybe it is, maybe it's not. But is network traffic a challenge for you to upload the audio file when you compress it?
Yeah, we compress it to MP3 actually, and we just use the 4G network because LoRa or networks like that are just not fast enough. Luckily in the Netherlands, even in rural areas, network is quite stable. So in other countries this might be an issue because of stability, but in the Netherlands network is stable enough that internet is not our biggest challenge, but there's definitely a high cost towards uploading. So it's definitely one of the reasons in the future we would like to do local analysis. But that's per sensor, even
Is that as well? If you jump up the audio in 5-second segments, as you say, because they all independent, right? Because that's how you do the sequencing correctly, or is the sequencing of those 5 millisecond or 5-second segments matter, or no?
Time-wise a little bit, because if you want to know where the keys are, you can do some triangulation with multiple sensors. So the more precise you know what the time span was, the more precise triangulation you can do. Yeah. No problem. Last one, and then I will get you all to the drinks.
So you mentioned you were listening to the audios.
Mm-hmm.
Have you changed the polls to check for the feedback to the ones you have? I don't know, a camera or anything else to confirm that there was a freeze?
We've actually done a lot of manual confirmations of those. So we had both our pilots and ourselves just in the fields mentioning, I see geese over there, they make a sound, and then like on a map put a dot so that we can not only confirm the sound and the time, but also if our localization worked a little bit, but also just farmers and people telling us, we hear something right now, or even the other way around. We once had a dog which apparently sounded really like a geese. So our pilots were going there and always mentioning us, I don't see any geese, why are we here? And then I was listening to the sound like, I'm not sure if this is a geese or not. So one time I went there and was talking to the farm, and this dog came up to me and I was like, okay, this is the thing I was hearing. So yeah, we have definitely done feedback on those. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, everybody. And if there's any more questions, you can always come up to me and discuss further.